The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Good morning, everybody. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews, and welcome back for another live stream, live reading. We're going to be continuing today with part 9 in our series, reading through Rene Worms's book, Foundations, Their Power and Influence. It's a 1958 book, and it is a follow-on from the output of the Cox Committee, which was investigating the philanthropic tax-exempt foundations to find out what they were really up to. Because sure, all this money is left and bequeathed and committed to the benefit of mankind, but are they really doing good things? Are they really working for the betterment of all? That's the question that was asked many, many years ago, back in the 50s. And the book we're reading through today is the conclusions that were discovered. Some of them quite shocking, some of them quite unexpected. But this book fills in a piece of the puzzle which is so critical to understand and wrap your head around. So welcome if you're tuning in live. It's great to have you here. If you're watching on the replay, also good to have you here. We're broadcasting to YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey, and Entropy. So you've got a few options of where you want to watch today. And it looks like all systems are a go. I hope my audio is coming through loud and clear. We've got Frank in the chat saying, another day, another dig into the foundations, into the rich mass of semi-hidden knowledge preserved between the covers of a key book. Thank you, Frank. Yes. And that message comes to us from a sunny but sprayed Dublin sky. Yeah, we've been getting a lot of sun recently and a lot of spraying as well, which I think might account for the fact that we're getting a lot of sun. It's been weird. It's been a heat wave. The grass is parched and turning brown in a lot of places. And the heat has been sort of oppressive and strange and lasting long into the evenings. We've had fans running constantly and windows open and lots of strange insects coming inside the house and getting trapped in the windows. And then we have to catch them and put them back outside again. And so it's been quite a strange summer so far. But I think these days, that's all we have to look forward to is strangeness, weirdness, and unprecedented events occurring one after the other, which seems to be the way it's going. You remember on Spinal Tap where they talk about turning it up to 11? Well, I think that's basically what they're doing now. So with the psyops, with the mind control, with the disinformation and the misinformation and the fake information and the artificial information, otherwise known as AI, they're turning it up to 11. They want to cause maximum chaos, maximum confusion. They want to warp our minds and make sure that none of us know which way is up or what is truly going on anywhere in the world. So there's a paradox because we've never been more connected. We've never been more interdependent as a species with people in other places. We've never had greater access to the four corners of the world. And yet we are probably none the wiser. Unless you actually know people on the ground in the place and you can communicate them and you trust them and you have a relationship with them and you've met them in 3D world at least once to confirm they are a real human being, you can't actually anymore rely on digital communications. Video can be faked very easily. Text, a large chunk of it increasingly is written by AI, and images as well. I mean, Photoshop, that's been around. That's been a thing for quite a long time. But now it's easier than ever to whip out these AI tools and tell it to conjure up images and audio and video and text. And it's just an era of maximum confusion because of that. And so if you want to step out of that confusion and spend a bit of time slowing down and defragmenting from that onslaught of data, I recommend you pick up a book and read one and dig into history and learn something that isn't mediated by ones and zeros. Now, of course, if you're tuning into the channel, there is certain digital mediation going on here, but I hope you will still benefit from today's reading. I'm looking forward to it. The chapter that's coming up today is all about the Ford Foundation. The chapter we had on the previous live stream last week was all about the foundation's influence on international relations. And that was a really good chapter because it connected Cecil Rhodes into the picture by way of his Rhodes Trust, which established the Rhodes Scholarships. And many of the people who go into that program end up in positions of authority and influence and power in governments, in the State Department in the USA, in other think tanks and NGOs and foundations. There's really a revolving door at the top between the State Department and these think tanks and foundations. Worms has done an excellent job of mapping that out. But what we learned in that last chapter was how all these experts are funded, the textbooks are created, the research is selected to bring us into an era of international collectivism. And I think that is what the key takeaway of that whole chapter was. There were some amazing quotes. There were some astonishing quotes. There was a line from a Rockefeller report which said, "Our goal is to create one world." And that was from the 40s, a Rockefeller Foundation report from the 40s. There was a couple of Carnegie Endowment reports which had amazing quotes in there too, saying that they were unofficially advising the government and that the policies that they discovered because of their objective empirical research found their way into government policy. And this is obviously bypassing the democratic process, if you believe that's a real thing. And this is giving us an account of how private money that is amassed through exploitation and slavery, because that's really the only way you can get rich, became public policy. So that's that transformation of private money into public policy that the rest of us have to live under. And I'll give you an update. The example I used last week was I was talking about how ridiculously hard it is for me to get a larger bin for my household waste because ours keeps filling up. We've got nappies going in there. We cook all our meals at home, so we've got, and we work from home 90% of the time. So we're a family of three, and we're here 24/7. And our bin is filling up, and it only gets collected every 2 weeks. So I applied to my council, who I give £200 a month to, under the auspices of council tax, to pay for these kinds of services. And they told me I can't have a bigger bin because I don't meet the requirements at this time, and I can apply again in 12 months. So that's my £200 a month that I'm paying, and I'm not even allowed to have a larger bin. I was allowed to present my case with, but I had a 250 character limit, which is about the length of a tweet. And there's not much you can say in 250 characters. And I presented my case, and then half an hour later, I got a message saying, "Nope, computer says no." I don't even know if a human being looked at my case. This is the infuriating thing. I had another encounter with a council phone number because I was given a parking charge when I was at work, and sticker was put on my windscreen, and when I got back to my car and I opened it, and it said, "If you want to appeal this, you can go to our website. You have to do it in writing. We do not accept challenges to these parking notices over the phone. This is their policy. This is their council, local government, local council policy. If you think that if you want to challenge your parking charge, which is £50, then you cannot do it by phone. You have to do it in writing." Okay, well, I'm not going to sit down and handwrite a letter and print it out and put it in a stamped addressed envelope and send it over. I'm going to do it electronically. So they give you a website, and you go to their website, And then on the website, it's click here if you want to challenge your PRN. I think it's called a PRN. PCN maybe, parking charge notice. And so you go there, but there's no email address or click here to contact us button. There's just instructions on if you want to challenge this, you have to contact us, but no way to contact them. So you ring them up and you say, and you want to get hold of this email address that you can send your written challenge to over this parking charge notice, which I didn't deserve because I was working and my employer is supposed to sort out my parking details, which they failed to do on this particular day. So I'm in my right to challenge this £50 fine that they're trying to impose on me. So you ring up the number to find out what the email address is for you to send your written challenge to the council. And then, of course, what do you get? An automated answering machine with an AI voice. What I think is an AI voice, because it didn't sound like a recording. You know, the recordings you can hear, they've usually got some background noise or there's some hesitation, or it just sounds like a human. This didn't. It sounded too polished, too artificial. And so you get put into this menu, and it's not a press the button, press the number for the service you want kind of menu. It's a speaking, right? Say what you want, and then our AI agent will figure it out and solve the problem for you. So I said I want to challenge the parking charge, and the response I got back was word for word what was written on the website with no details on how to contact. So I said, tell me what is the email address to contact to challenge this parking charge notice. And then it restarted the loop and started reading the whole website verbatim, word for word again to me. So I said, stop, and it just carried on. I said, stop, and it just carried on. And then I hung up because I got angry and frustrated and mad and very I had to take a break, because these kind of things are designed to drive people insane. They're designed to tip you over the edge, right? And we're in this boiling pot scenario where the ratchet is being tightened by degrees. They're just hitting it daily, it seems, to squeeze people to the point of exasperation, desperation, frustration, so that you'll lash out, so that you'll get angry, so that you'll maybe you'll turn to television, maybe you'll turn to beer and alcohol or wine or whiskey, maybe you'll turn to marijuana or cigarettes or junk food. There are many things out there to ease the suffering of the modern world, but of course all of those solutions are toxic and poisonous and deadly in and of themselves as well, for a variety of reasons. So that's what the system is that we live in, and it's been scientifically designed this way. And the scientists who designed it got most of their money from philanthropic, tax-exempt foundations, and that's what we're reading about in this book. I hope that little introductory ramble there made sense, and I tied it in nicely, but there we are. I do have a little preamble ramble prepared for you today, so we're going to get into that imminently. I just saw we got Justin in the chat as well. Good to have you here, sir. That last chapter, yes, indeed, it was very good. So let's get ready for our preamble ramble. As I'm doing that, I will just say, if you want to support at any point, you can go to allmylinks.com/HazeReviews. And it has everything there that you could ever need to find out where I am and what I'm doing, to participate, to get in touch, to benefit from the resources that I put together, or to send a few quid my way, or a few dollars, or a few shekels, or a few euro, or whatever currency still exists for the time being, until we're all switched over to the digital programmable currency, which I'm sure will not be spendable on channels such as mine. We laugh, but it's actually very scary and tragic and disgusting and disgraceful that we've allowed things to become this way. But all we can do is learn, all we can do is study, all we can do is try and uplift ourselves out of ignorance and apathy by way of knowledge and information, so we can become better at explaining these things to alert other people around us to what's going on. And so to that end, we're going to be starting today's preamble ramble by looking at the Social Science Research Council, which was founded in 1923. So this is a US-based, independent, international non-profit organization dedicated to advancing research in the social sciences and related disciplines. It was established in Manhattan, and it has approximately 70 people working there. And this is one of the organizations which popped up quite a few times in the book over the last few chapters, because we had this whole section as well on social sciences and how it's not really a science, but they've called it a science just to give it some credibility and make it sound like it's a real thing, but it's not. It's just a sort of fake practice that is used to prop up the policy that they want to roll out that people wouldn't accept, only that they do accept it because somebody with a clipboard took a poll, gathered some data, and therefore it's empirical, and we can stand by it and accept it. So Social Science Research Council, it's been doing its thing for 106 years now. And you can see here that the revenue is $23.5 million, and the expenses are $19.8 million. So there is a sort of $3.4 million, or is that $4.4 million? No, it's 3.4, isn't it? 3.6, sorry, $1 million profit that this council is making. And it's international, and it's a non-profit organization. So how does a non-profit organization pull in 23 million of revenue and have 19 million of expenses? Doesn't the difference between those two numbers count as profit? I don't know. I'm not an economist. I'm not a banker. I don't know what I'm talking about, but it seems a bit suspicious to me. But what is this organization? So you'll notice at the top here, and this is really interesting, that there's some Wikipedia page redirects. It tells you if you want the British organization, then click here to see the Economic and Social Research Council. It says if you want the Irish organization, see Irish Research Council. Or if you want the Australian organization, see Academy of the Social Sciences in Australia. Now this reminds me of the Commonwealth what were they called? I showed these books on the last one. The conferences, the Commonwealth conferences, right? These conferences were held by the Royal Institute for International Affairs, and they were published by the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the books themselves. But if you go inside these, you can see it says, issued under the joint auspices of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Canadian Institute of International Affairs. So let's go over to the book count quickly. It's a good example to use. Yeah, so this one is the joint auspices of the Royal Institute, which is the UK version, the Canadian Institute of International Affairs. So this first one here, 1934, that's just the British and the Canadian. If you fast forward to the second of these Commonwealth conferences, this is called the British Commonwealth and the Future. Now we've got the Canadian Institute, the Australian Institute, we've got the New Zealand Institute, the South Africa Institute, and the Indian Institute of International Affairs involved in this one, only 2 years later, 1939. Sorry, 5 years later, 1939. So my point is that they're not joking when they say that these are international organizations, which means they're not beholden to the interests of your nation, the people in your nation, right? This is an agenda which transcends and moves beyond the artificial borders that are established and the holding pens, really, the tax farms. That's all the country really is. And we're sort of led to believe that these countries are different tribes that are vying and competing, because that's the narrative we've been given about how humans operate. And unless it's the international level, in which case we can all magically somehow come together under the auspices of a single world system of scientific governance and that international collectivism that these foundations have been advancing and funding for so long. But yeah, you've got the British, the Australian, the Irish equivalents of this group, and I'm betting as well that there's other countries that have similar councils established within them as well. But this is one of the most auspicious ones because it's been going for so long. So what's the early history of this group? Well, they came into being in 1923 as a result of the initiative of the American Political Science Association's Committee on Research, headed by the association's president, Charles E. Merriam, who was a University of Chicago chair of political science, and he was also an early champion of behaviorally oriented social science. So this popped up in last week's preamble ramble as well. It was behaviorally oriented, and how social science was being connected with behaviorism, right? Manipulating people, nudging them, if you want to put another word on it, via the nudge unit, and also Cass Sunstein's book, which is just called Nudge. It's about figuring out how to manipulate people to do the thing you want them to do without them knowing that you're manipulating them to do that thing. It's kind of also part and parcel of advertising and marketing and sales. It doesn't have to be, but in most cases it is. So they're interested in manipulating and managing your behavior scientifically. Continuing with the early history here of the SSRC, representatives of the American Economic Association, the American Sociological Society, and the American Statistical Association joined with Merriam and his associates and formed the world's first coordinating body of the social sciences. So we're going to, in this preamble ramble, this is going to be a theme that's coming along, this coordinating body, right? This is the group that sits atop lots of smaller groups. You might call it an umbrella organization, and it coordinates them. It tells them what is right and what is wrong. It dictates to them what is accepted and acceptable and what is not. To support its work, the SSRC turned not to the US government, whose support seemed more appropriate for the natural sciences, but to private foundations. Okay, so this is not money. This is not funding by the people, of the people, for the people, via the US government and the taxation. No. These are the private foundations, which represent private money, which represents private interests. That's where the SSRC went for its cash. For the first 50 years, well over 3/4 of the SSRC's funding was provided by the Russell Sage Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation, and not one, but 2 Rockefeller philanthropies, the Laura Spelman Rockefeller Memorial and the Rockefeller Foundation. And remember, the Rockefeller Foundation said the task is to build one world. So again, this is Wikipedia. It's not the best source, but it is a good source to see what is omitted and point to and say, look, this is mainstream information, especially when people are disbelieving or discounting or trying to wave aside our concerns as researchers and seekers of truth. You can learn a lot from Wikipedia. It's a good jumping off point. So the SSRC was part of a wider progressive era movement, and we're going to look at that next, or in a moment. It says leading thinkers in various fields were encouraged to think creatively about how to address the social and political ills brought on by the Industrial Revolution. So this is important to realize and remember, because if you sort of take the view of history that nothing really happens by accident, nothing is left to chance. This is kind of a view put forward by Alan Watt of cuttingthroughthematrix.com. No big events are left to chance. They're scripted, they're meticulously planned ahead of time. And so those people involved in the progressive era and the social science research councils that came out of it to fix the problems of the Industrial Revolution, they knew it was coming ahead of time. They knew the Industrial Revolution was coming, and they knew that it would lead to all these problems that could then be pointed to as a means of galvanizing public support for further changes, further governmental restrictions, taxations, laws, legislations that they wanted to bring in, but people would not have accepted prior to the horrific conditions created knowingly and on purpose by way of the Industrial Revolution. You see, it's a problem, reaction, solution type of system and methodology that happens over and over and over and over again. So continuing here, other independent, non-governmental, policy-minded institutions founded in this era include the American Law Institute, 1923, the Brookings Institution, 1927, and the Council on Foreign Relations, 1921. So this little period here, this 5-year period, you see all these institutes and councils popping up, ready to push forward policy for the polity, right? The policy is for the polity, P-O-L-I-T-Y. That's just the people, the commoners, the slaves, the serfs, the feudal subjects. This is what we all have to live in. People at the very top, they get to live outside of this, and it doesn't affect them or matter to them. And so, there you go. So similar to other progressive era institutions, the SSRC represented a new kind of hybrid. It was not a governmental body, it was not an academic association, and it was not a university, right? So sort of the places where you might expect the authority and the intelligence and the expertise to come from, nope, not anymore, right? Now we've got these new unelected, unaccountable, international NGO, tax-exempt, foundation-funded groups that are driving the policy, doing the studies, coming up with the fake empirical research data to back up the things that they just wanted to do in the first place. Along with Merriam, 2 other individuals were especially vital to the SSRC's early success. One was Wesley Clare Mitchell, and he was one of the founders of the New School for Social Research. I bet that's worth looking at some point. And the other was Beardsley Rummel, who trained in psychometrics at the University of Rockefeller. The University of Chicago. Rummel was active in the early phases of Rockefeller philanthropies. He poured Rockefeller resources into the social sciences and in general, and the SSRC in particular. So another 2 men worth knowing about and reading at some point. There's so many little rabbit holes. I could do a whole show just diving through Wikipedia, but it's nice to break things up a little bit. Anyway, continuing with this page, it says that all 3 men channeled their progressive values into the cause of empirical research and knowledge. In his 2001 history of the SSRC, Kenton Worcester highlighted 4 aspects of their founding vision that remain central to this day, so 103 years later. One is interdisciplinarity. And so this is just the idea of bringing people from various disciplines and traditions together and standardizing and homogenizing what they all think and agree on, because that is the only reason why you would do that. They'll tell you, if we bring all these different people from different disciplines and traditions together, that will lead to some magical benefit, because we've got the clashing of ideas and viewpoints, and this will lead to healthy debate and healthy discussion on the battlefield of ideas that will allow us to get closer to the truth, which is all well and good and probably what should happen in theory. But in actual practice, you get more of a Delphi technique type of situation, whereby the dominant consensus ideas, which are consensus just because they're safe, and the consensus, as we know, is funded into existence by way of this philanthropic foundation money, the consensus squishes out the individuality, it squishes out the dissent and the voices which question things, and it concretizes the ideas which are never to be questioned, which then become foundational, right? So it's no accident that these things are called the foundations when they establish the foundational ideas, assumptions, presuppositions that everything else is then built on. So this interdisciplinarity sounds good on the surface. What actually happens in practice? That's the question I'd be asking. The second aspect of the founding vision is the intermediary role. So this is talked about quite a bit in the book, where Wormser describes what he calls the interlock. And it's described pretty well here. It says, the federal government was not prepared to put its weight behind a central funding agency for the social sciences. Thus, the SSRC frequently acted as an intermediary between researchers and research supporting foundations, assuming the functions of assessing research priorities and distributing research funds. So there you go. That tells you right there what their function is. They're going to decide what the research priorities are, and they'll dole out the money to those who are willing to carry out and fulfill those priorities. Now, again, on the surface, it's like, well, good. We need a group of benevolent experts to choose what is most important to fund and research and study. Yes, that makes sense. But if they have a bias, if they have an ideology, if they have a political agenda, then it's not going to be fair and objective and empirical, is it? It's going to lead us towards international collectivism, which is exactly what happened and is happening and has happened. But there you go. It tells you right there. The intermediary role, the interlock, this intermediary between the government and the scientists and the social and the people carrying out the work, in other words, who can't make money themselves. They need access to this foundation money in order to make a living, pay their bills, feed their children. And so this is why there's really a homogenization and a standardization rather than any kind of open and honest debate, discussion, disagreement, some intellectually fair and robust challenging of ideas and assumptions. Instead, they just become calcified. The third aspect of the founding vision of the SRC, which remains central to this day, is institutional flexibility, right? So they're sort of chameleon organization. They change and they adapt and they morph as time goes by to presumably to keep up with the times, to continue existing, and to move things along to the next stage and the next stage. This is incredibly important. As we know, we're in the era of accelerationism that's been detailed by Ian Davis in his excellent book, The Technocratic Dark State. Yes, I always have to check that. And also Courtney Turner and Patrick Wood in their book as well, The Final Betrayal. They talk about accelerationism. Things are going to change faster and faster and faster and faster as they rush to collapse the system that we're living in so that they can roll out their scientific, technocratic system of digital slavery and control. And so the groups, the institutions, the councils, the NGOs, the corporations that can't keep up, they're going to get left behind. So you have to adapt, you have to be flexible, you have to be ready to rebrand at a moment's notice and change direction and pivot and be, there's a corporate word for this that they always use. What is it? It means adaptable, but it's a specific corporate piece of lingo that they like to use. But anyway, it's escaping my memory right now. But yeah, being flexible, being able to change, being able to pivot at a moment's notice. That's key. And then fourth is scientific advance in the greater interests of society. So that's it. The fourth aspect of the founding vision is collectivism. It's this nebulous society that you are part of, and which you have to subsume your individual interests to the benefit of, right? You have to stay home to flatten the curve because society is at risk, and you have to wear your face nappy and take your experimental mRNA injection for the good of society. Who is the society? Isn't society made up of individuals? Aren't I an individual? Shush, you're thinking too much. Put your television on, wear your face nappy. You're obviously getting too much oxygen to your brain. But it says that they wanted to see social science move in a more data-sensitive, empirical direction. So from its founding in 1923, the founding vision included data-sensitive empirical direction. So that's data gathering, which means surveillance. And then once you gather all this data, you can be like, see, the things we're doing are empirical. They're backed up by an empiricism, scientific, and they're scientific because we gathered all this data on you. And so this is why we have to make sure you don't eat meat and you don't get to travel outside your 15-minute city. Moving on a little bit, they launched a load of committees covering various things from agriculture to crime to social security to pressure groups and propaganda. And some of the people involved, Franklin D. Roosevelt, served as a member of the Council's Advisory Committee on Business Research. After he became president, collaborations between administration officials, the Rockefeller Foundation, council staff and council networks led to the committee work that accompanied the formulation and implementation of Social Security. So this is one of the benevolent sounding reasons that you've got to pay tax, right? Because if you don't pay your tax, then old people will die and they won't have any security in later life. We've got to pay out and look after these old people. And yet, you know, at least in England, old people die every year because they can't afford their heating bills, or they get shipped off to be abused in old folks' homes. And then we saw what was done to the old folk by way of the COVID protocols and measures back in the Big C event, right? It was a real assault. They did their best to knock off as many of the old folk as possible. And yet we're told that, oh, you have to pay your £200 a month to the local council. You can't have a bigger bin, but we need to take this money off you and every household, presumably, so that we can benefit for the social good of society, the social society that you're part of. That's why we need to take your money. It also tells us that during World War II, the Council served as a bridge between the Roosevelt administration and the social sciences, working behind the scenes to ensure that qualified social sciences were placed with appropriate agencies. So that's a little admission there that these groups are not elected, they're not accountable, they're not operating in the light of day. They're working behind the scenes to make sure the qualified right people who are going to say the right stuff, push the right ideas and agenda, get into the appropriate agencies. Then after World War II, in the wake of World War II, there was widespread consensus on the need in the United States to invest in international studies. Right. So I guess all the families of the men who were killed in that particular not phony wars, and it didn't happen, but phony wars and what we're told about the reasons why it happened is a lot of nonsense. I'm sure they were all standing around going, oh, we really need, my husband's dead and my son's dead and my father's dead. So we really need to invest in international studies so that this doesn't happen again. Yeah, I'm sure that was the widespread consensus of all the families affected by that. And the Japanese people who were rounded up and put in concentration camps, I'm sure once they got out, they were all like, oh, we got to invest in international studies to make sure we don't get put in concentration camps by the American government next time. Right. It's just fucking... Anyway, I shouldn't swear. Apologies for dropping that F-bomb there. Sometimes it's just... words fail me. Anyway. Continuing, liberals and conservatives alike viewed the creation of a large brain trust of internationally oriented political scientists and economists as an urgent national priority. See, it transcends the party politics of the day. However, there was considerable tension between those who felt strongly that, instead of applying Western models, social scientists should develop culturally and historically contextualized knowledge of various parts of the world by working closely with humanists, and those who thought that social scientists should seek to develop overarching macro-historical theories that could draw connections between patterns of change and development across different geographies. So quite a long sentence there, packed full of lingo. Basically what they're saying is, should we develop awareness of the cultures as they exist in specific parts of the world, presumably in order to respect them and protect them? Or should we just look at overarching macro historical connections, look at the ways in which all these groups, all these countries are the same, and then presumably strengthen those ties by squeezing out the differences, squeezing out the things that make culture a joy to experience when you go to another place and you see the different foods and styles of clothing and religious practices and architecture and art and all that other stuff. Get rid of that, make it all the same. That's how I read this considerable tension here. It tells us that the former became area studies advocates and the latter became modernization theory, which should be called probably standardization theory, but I don't get to make up these labels, unfortunately. In this context, the post-war SSRC had two agendas which were at odds with each other. So one of them was this area studies, and one of them was modernization theory. On the one hand, the SSRC was keen to join forces with the major foundations to promote area studies. On the other hand, the SSRC also wished to promote behavioralist social science, which descended from the Charles Merriam's pre-war concerns. Remember, he was he the founding member? Yes. So to further its interest in area studies, the SSRC teamed up with the ACLS in administering area research training fellowships with Carnegie Corporation money to further its behaviorist. So they're hedging their bets here. They're trying to do both area studies and behavioralist studies. So to further the behavioralist agenda, they set up various committees, most notably the Committee on Political Behavior, which was organized by E. Pendleton Herring, who we talked about in last week's Preamble Ramble. Go back and check out that video if you want to know more about him. Very strange character. Not many pictures of him online. Very lived a life of influence and had many accolades and achievements against his name, but not much else can be found about him, really. Some stuff behind paywalls, and I haven't managed to take the time to circumvent the paywalls and bring those articles to you. But a name worth being aware of and looking up, E. Pendleton Herring. The SSRC's agenda for the behavioral social sciences came apart in the 70s, and then it left area studies as the central platform ever since. And so they're looking at certain areas like Africa, China, Eastern Europe, Japan, Korea, Latin America, Muslim societies, the Near and Middle East, South Asia, Southeast Asia, the Soviet Union Studies Committee, East European Studies Committee, and Western Europe. So just everywhere, basically. Studying all these areas and figuring out how we can knit them closer together. How can we foster what's called interdependence, right? This is a concept that's been written about since for well over 100 years. The Interdependent World and Its Problems. That's a book by Ramsey Moore, M-U-I-R, and it basically means knitting together the economies of the world and the trading systems and the international corporations that operate outside and beyond the boundaries of nation states, and as a view to arguing that, well, now that we're all interlocked and interlinked and interdependent, we're going to need some sort of supranational governing body to oversee all this. So you got to study all these areas, gather that intel and the information, and figure out how we can best bring them in, knit them into the fold, knit them into this international tapestry that we then want to control and operate from our little Silicon Valley headquarters. It says that the joint SSRC-ACLS committees would accomplish most of their works with funding from the Ford Foundation. And then for the next 30 years, these two groups would award approximately 3,000 dissertation fellowships and another 2,800 postdoctoral research grants. Kenton Worcester said the cumulative total of awards for field research outside the United States was staggering. So this group, this Social Science Research Council, truly is an internationalist organization. I mean, that's a low, at least according to Wikipedia, for whatever that's worth. And this bit was quite interesting. The council's forays into non-area studies were limited by the challenges of the funding environment. In the immediate post-war period, the SSRC had benefited from unprecedented federal support. But the growing tide of American conservatism, which began in the 50s, eventually led to a populist backlash against funding social research. And by the time Ronald Reagan assumed office, the political atmosphere had soured over the role of the social sciences and public investment in social research. So the pendulum swings from the left to the right. That's an excellent song by Jordan. I forgot his last name. But Jordan, I want to say Jordan Nuttall, but that's a different person. He's on Substack doing alternate history. So if anyone knows who I'm talking about, please put the name in the chat there. But he's got this song, The Pendulum Swings from the Left to the Right, because you can only push things so far until there's a backlash, but you know that's going to happen. So you control the backlash, and you then use the momentum and the energy of the backlash to also further your agenda. And this is how it's done. It's the 3 steps forward, 2 steps back methodology. Over and over and over and over and over again becomes the totalitarian tiptoe towards absolute slavery and digital domination of our lives. Last tidbit here is that the SSRC's records are stored at the Rockefeller Archive Center in Sleepy Hollow, New York, which is a village. It's a tiny little village called Sleepy Hollow. Nothing to see here. Sounds very innocent and quaint, doesn't it? But actually it has all of the Rockefeller secrets in their archive, the hive and the ark. It's a very interesting word, archive. I've been reading Alan Watts' book, trilogy, Cutting Through series, and he focuses quite a bit on this word. You've got hive as in the beehive, and then you've got the ark as in Noah's Ark, right? How you survived the flood. So very interesting word. So a little bit before we move on from the SSRC, the fellowship and other awards section says 15,000 fellows have been funded since in the last 100 years. That's quite a few. And there's some landmark publications here. There's a lot of publications actually, but the two that caught my eye was The Power of Religion in the Public Sphere. I'd be interested to know if that is what the outcome of that particular study was. And then there's also a series of After September the 11th, a series of books. And that they are probably reinforcing the mainstream narrative and justifying the wars and the war on terror and the Patriot Act and these kind of things that came off the back of that particular event. Some notable fellows and committee members, a lot of these I'd never heard of, but there's John Kenneth Galbraith, who we've learned about before on the channel. There's also Margaret Mead, and there was also Condoleezza Rice, who looks a bit like Margaret Mead, I think. Don't they look kind of similar? Maybe it's just me. And then finally, assets. As of 2024, the Social Science Research Council has assets of $72 million. Not bad for a non-profit. And if you go to their website, you got at the top here, 100 years, Social Science Research Council. There's a beautiful picture of the ball spinning in space that we all live on. It says, our work is guided by the conviction that strong democracies, just societies, and shared prosperity all require better understanding of complex social, cultural, economic, and political processes. Sounds great, doesn't it? It says here that for 100 years, the Social Science Research Council has connected the public, private, and non-profit sectors. So it's a bit of a public-private partnership working. It's connected those 3 sectors to social scientists working to illuminate and address our most pressing societal challenges. So we're getting illuminated thanks to these social scientists and their public-private partnership, which is pouring money into their pockets with no agenda. They're totally objective, of course. So remember that section talked about the progressive era. I'm just going to have a sip. The progressive era is really important to look at. Now, this is a gigantic article page, Wikipedia page. There is loads on here. Haven't been through all of it, but what a little resource you've got. I'll give you a quick overview, though, of the progressive era. This was from the 1890s to the 1920s. So this is around the time that you've got the Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes, it wasn't founded. Trust, right? Creation of the Round Table groups, the creation of the Rhodes scholarships, the Balfour Declaration, World War I, lead into World War I. So this is the progressive era. And in the United States, this was characterized by social and political reform efforts. Reformers during this era, known as progressives, sought to address issues they associated with rapid industrialization, urbanization, immigration, and corruption, as well as the loss. That's funny, the political corruption just shows you a picture of the USA's flag. As well as the loss of competition in the market because of trusts and monopolies, and the great concentration of wealth and political power among a very few individuals. So isn't it great that here we are in 2026 and that problem has been solved? And that we haven't seen over the last 100 years a continuation of this concentration of wealth in the... Oh, wait, hang on a sec. No, wait, that's exactly what we've seen. So thanks, progressives. Oh, we got a commenter in the chat. Jordan Page, thank you. Yeah, so look up the song, The Pendulum by Jordan Page. It's a great song. He's got a lot of good songs, actually. Rabbit Hole is another really good one. I fell down the rabbit hole. But Pendulum is really good. It's really powerful. And he's a top man all around. A musician and educator and producer of children and farmer. So he's doing it. He's doing it. He's living it, right? Jordan Page. Thank you for that. I'm not sure what your screen name is. It just says @Matsy11A. So I'm just going to have to call you Matt. Thank you, Matt. We've got a few comments as well in the YouTube chat. Maybe I should take a second to have a look at these. Frank says, your experiences, as described at the beginning, Nick, were a carefully designed horror show and an exemplar of what's fast becoming the insane norm. Yeah, that's it. It's there to drive you up the wall so that you will snap and get angry and give up and just pay the fine. So that's really what it's about. It's gathering more money out of you. Frank says, the ESRI is the Irish version in Manhattan, by the way, where the Rockefeller UN headquarters lives. Yeah, good point. Stephen Raddy says, yo, first time on a live, Nick. I love your style and the amount of different offshoots and rabbit holes you send me down. You're right over the target, my friend. Thank you very much. I'm really glad you enjoy the style, and I'm glad that you are going off on rabbit hole searches and adventures of your own off the back of what I do. That's great news to me. Justin says, Walmart in Canada had people needing to be vaccinated before entering. Wow. Yeah, there you go. The insanity, normalization of these kinds of things. And then pretty soon it'll be mediated by facial recognition. They've already installed that in the supermarkets here. So how long until your vaccination status is linked up to some digital system, some database somewhere, and then as you try and walk into the supermarket, it scans your face and the gate does or doesn't open. And then, you know, if you kick up a fuss or you're upset about this, then the people behind you in the queue who have had their vaccination because they've done the right thing, because they are good citizens, they just get angry and, hey, get out of the way, mister, I need to do my shopping, right? And you get that collective social peer pressure that makes most people cave because they're very scared to stand up to peer pressure. David Stevenson says, hi, Nick. Many of the books you're sharing are available for free from WeLib downloads. That's WeLib. Yeah, it's a good app. You can download WeLib. It's an app. You can have a desktop app and you can search it and get hold of digital copies of a lot of this stuff. And thank you for the reminder. David also says, what is in a word interdependent? As Alan Watt once explained, the word inter means to bury, and the latter is self-explanatory. Yes, excellent point. So this is why you get international. It means to inter, to bury the nation. Goodbye nations, right? I always wonder how that relates to internet, though. Do we inter the net? Because the internet is a net, like a web, we are chained to a block on the blockchain, and we are stuck in the World Wide Web, and we are caught in the internet. But yeah, you're absolutely correct there. These words always have multiple meanings, deeper meanings, and for anyone who wants to go deeper on that, I really recommend grabbing a copy of this beautiful book. Doesn't have any title on the front, but it's called Cutting Through by Alan Watt, and I'm about that far through it now. I've done the first 2 volumes. I'm on the 3rd volume, and it's really, really, really very good. And it will help you see language in a whole new way. It will break you out of your conditioning with regards to words and how they are spelled. And the word spell itself, right, means magic, to cast a spell. So they are casting spells in the spelling, as Alan often reminded us. So let's get back now to the progressive era. And yeah, so apparently this came out of a desire to stop wealth concentrating in the hands of a very few individuals. So obviously they were wildly successful with that. At the time, though, reformers expressed concern about slums and poverty and labor conditions. Multiple overlapping movements pursued social, political, and economic reforms by advocating changes in governments, by advocating scientific methods and professionalism. They were also advocating regulating business and protecting the natural environment and seeking to improve urban living and working conditions. So this reminds me very much of Fabian socialism, because they were so concerned with the labor conditions and the plight of the poor and the slums and the poverty, right? Or at least that's what they told us. But actually, this is just the Trojan horse, which is used to bring in scientific methods of governance, right? They put changes in governance right next to scientific methods there. That's no accident, I don't think. They want to change the governments and have a scientific, top-down, technocratic, data-driven, automated, digital, AI-mediated system of governance and control. Right? They want to regulate business. This just means making sure you and I can't start a business. The small and medium businesses are gone. It's the gigantic international corporations that they own and control. They're the only ones that are allowed to exist because of all the permits, because of all the licenses, because of all the hoops you got to jump through, because of all the requirements on reporting and accounting and record keeping. It just makes it unfeasible for the small business owner to operate. And so regulating business really just means squeezing out the small and medium businesses, right? Protecting the natural environment, well, that, of course, is our environmentalism. This is all, you have to lower your standard of living and you have to live in sustainable austerity because polar bears or something. And we know all about that by way of excellent books such as Jacob Nordengard's Rockefeller Controlling the Game. I posted an interview with Dr. Nordengard recently. He was on the Delling pod. And this book, Rockefeller Controlling the Game, is really good and just gives you that deep, verifiable history about the Rockefellers' involvement in the environmental movement. And he, the author himself, Jacob Nordengard, he was an environmentalist. And he started looking into who's funding this environmental movement, right? Where's it coming from? And he was shocked to find that they were oil magnates, they were industrialists, they were the Rockefeller families. And here you've got all the documentation to back it up. The G20, the global summits, the Earth Charter, the Agenda 2030 timeline. He's a really good writer, author, and researcher. So books such as that explain to us what the push to protect the natural environment is really all about. Books such as that and many others, I might add. But I thought I would mention him because I was listening to him earlier this week. And that episode I posted in my Telegram chat was very good, I thought. So continuing with this progressive era page. Corrupt and undemocratic political machines and their oligarch bosses were a major target of progressive reformers. To revitalize democracy, progressives established direct primary elections, direct election of senators, initiatives, referendums, and women's suffrage, which was promoted to advance democracy and bring the presumed moral influence of women into politics. So men are immoral, men are incapable of acting with a conscience and doing the right thing. So that's why we need to give the women the vote. And it's one of those, again, double-edged things. Like, okay, all well and good, yes. So every person living in a society or a group or a community of some kind should have a say in what happens. So yes, you get the vote, but what is the vote worth? What's it actually worth? What actually happens? How much power does your single vote actually have? And of course, bringing the women in and giving them the vote was very close to also bringing them into the workforce so that they could be their income could be taxed, which is a way to bring the children out of the home and away from the influence of the parents and under the control and influence of the government and of the state educators, who themselves are political and have an ideology to press and impress upon the minds of the youth, right? So it all fits in. Many of the progressives also advocated for prohibition of alcohol, and we know how well that went. They also targeted monopolies, right? Which sounds again like a good thing. Let's fight these monopolies. And here we are in 2026, not a monopoly in sight. Oh wait, hang on a sec. Amazon and Tesla and and actually, you could argue that there aren't any monopolies because we usually have at least two options, right? There's usually a Coke and a Pepsi. There's an Apple and a Microsoft, you know. So yeah, well, look, there's no monopolies in the modern day. Of course not. So major inroads made by the progressive movement in fighting monopolies. Thanks for that. Their other goals, it says, were using scientific, medical, and engineering solutions to reform government. And progressives aimed to professionalize the social sciences, especially history, economics, and political science, and improve efficiency with scientific management, aka Taylorism. So this is really important too. When it says they aimed to professionalize something, that just means standardize. That means consolidate. That means establish a consensus. And we'll have a little more on history and the consensus of history very soon. But this is very much worth being aware of and knowing about. Scientific management from Frederick Winslow, I think Taylor was his full name. It says that the progressive movement operated chiefly at the local level, but later it expanded to the state and national levels, and then, of course, from there it goes international. The progressive leaders were often from the educated middle class. Interesting. So this educated middle class, this is also the same class that the Fabian socialists come from. You can view their efforts and their impact as an attempt to raise themselves up to the level of their betters. So you've got the elite, the upper class, the upper crust, that 1%, the bloodlines, those who print the money and control the wealth, build and knock down civilizations, create religions and languages and calendars and all these other systems of control that we are forced to live in. The very high deviant priesthood, as Alan Watt would call them. And then, but they need managers. They need people who are going to keep the rest of us in check. And you have to give, you have to bribe these people to do that work. So you have to give them a slightly better standard of living and a higher income so that they can be differentiated from the working serfs, and that they can, and that's how you incentivize them to do these managerial roles. So you have to create this middle class. Now, of course, what happens then is the middle class, they get a bit uppity, and they're like, "Well, I want to be up there with you. I want to raise my position even further. I've made it this far." And then certain psychopathic traits will lead to people trying to grab more and more power and more influence and more wealth for themselves and more control for themselves. So you have to bear that in mind and see how they could be using their narrative of caring for the poor and caring about the working conditions and the labor conditions, that they're using that merely for personal gain and personal power and the expansion of personal wealth, right? So if you can go along and build yourself a foundation or a council or an institute of some kind, then you might be able to net yourself a tidy little profit and put some assets together in the order of 72 million, for example, even though you are a non-profit organization. So the wealthiest people in the world technically often don't own anything, but because they've just created the system and rigged it in such a way that they get to enjoy all these benefits and all these freedoms, and they get to use all these properties, and they get to travel around, and they get to enjoy this life of luxury, but they don't actually own it technically on paper. If you looked at them, if you were to sue them, their assets, or at least the assets that they have access to and control over and use, are not owned by them. So this educated middle class, are they out for us working class, us working serfs at the bottom here, or are they out for themselves? Big question, very much worth dwelling on. So continuing here with the progressive era, it says that some of the originators of progressive ideals and efforts, so certain key groups, thinkers, writers, and activists, and some of the ideas and movements that came out of this. One of them was muckraking, exposing corruption. And the bit that I wanted to focus on here that I thought was curious was this section. It says, most of the muckrakers wrote nonfiction, but fictional exposés often had a major impact as well, such as those by Upton Sinclair. Fictional expose. I mean, is it an expose if it's fictional? Isn't that an oxymoron? Surely an expose should be telling you the truth, reflecting and depicting reality. But this example of Upton Sinclair, he wrote a 1906 novel called The Jungle. In this novel, he exposed the unsanitary and unsafe working conditions of the meat-packing industry in graphic detail, hoping to arouse working-class solidarity. He quipped, "I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident, I hit their stomach." Yes, it was a total accident, wasn't it? As readers demanded and got the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act. So that little half a paragraph there, I think, is quite revealing in the methodology and how it's done. You get some author to come along, I don't know, H.G. Wells springs to mind. He comes up with a fictional account which drums up working class solidarity because it's pressed into their minds that this is the way it is, even though it's a fictional account. Then they all get together and start banging their fists on the table and say, "We need you to do something about this terrible problem." And then the government steps in and passes Meat Inspection Acts and Pure and Food Drug Acts. And then, and then fast forward 100 years, and here we are with, in America's got some of the worst quality meat in the entire world because of all the hormones and antibiotics that are injected into it and the conditions in which those animals are raised and slaughtered. And then you got the Pure Food and Drug Act, and again, this legislation is passed, and then it is messed with and altered over the years and updated and changed so that only certain approved, authorized producers of food and drugs can compete for that marketplace. And then also it's a weaponization against the population as they are prevented from having access to, for example, raw milk, which is illegal to sell in certain places in America, high-quality organic meat that has been reared in accordance with regenerative farming practices in agriculture, for example, or just the quality of the drugs that are allowed to be handed out, doled out to young people, the opioid epidemic and crisis, for example, that's going on there. So this is a great example of how it's done through fictional exposés, like authors who just make stuff up, leading to real world laws being passed and thus restrictions on our freedoms, all by way of just just fiction, somebody making stuff up. So I thought that was worth pointing out as well. So another aspect of progressivism is modernization. So if you remember on this previous tab, we were looking at the Social Science Research Council and how it had this sort of schizophrenic split between modernization theory and behavioralist social theory. Area studies and modernization theory, which was part of behavioralist social science. And then here we are, progressivism. Key part of it is modernization. The progressives were avid modernizers. They believed in science and technology as the grand solution to society's flaws. They looked to education as the key to bridging the gap between their present wasteful society and technologically enlightened future society. Technologically enlightened future society. So it's a utopian vision, in other words. Technocracy is part of utopia. And I'll be talking to Daniel McCarthy about his book, The Story of Nowhere, which is all about the history of utopianism. A belief in the ability of experts and in the efficiency of government intervention. Yeah, so again, they're using the right word, right? They're using the word belief because it's a religion. It's something you've got to have faith in. You've got to have faith in the government and the experts. Don't test their logic and their reasoning and their experiments. Don't run experiments for yourself. Don't analytically, logically consider their arguments. Just believe in them. Just have faith in them. Just trust the science. And then scientific management, as promulgated by Frederick Winslow Taylor, became a watchword for industrial efficiency and elimination of waste, with the stopwatch as its symbol. Frederick Winslow Taylor has a very important quote, which I'll show you in a moment. Philanthropy. So the number of rich families climbed exponentially from 100 or so millionaires in the 1870s to 4,000 in 1892 and 16,000 in 1916. So people were getting richer and wealthier by the sounds of it. The number of rich families. So people were getting richer and wealthier. It sounds like something... maybe I mean it'd be interesting to see that as against population numbers, right? As a proportion of the population. Obviously, it's still very low, but it's this idea that people were getting richer, families were finding their way through to material success, and this led to philanthropy because people started to realize, how do we hold on to this money? How do we keep it under control? How do we influence things so that we can carry on to enjoy our wealth and living in our lap of luxury and make sure other people don't get up to where we are? In other words, how do we, as I said on the last live stream, how do we pull the ladder up behind us to make sure nobody else can climb up to our dizzying heights of wealth and comfort? And philanthropy is a means by which you can do that. It's as much to keep people down, other people down, as it is to keep you and your cronies up. Middle class values. So again, it came from the middle class. The middle class was characterized by their rejection of the individualistic philosophy of the upper 10,000. I'd never heard of the upper 10,000 before. That's a 19th century phrase referring to the wealthiest 10,000 residents of New York City. So look at this. The middle class, who are driving this progressivism, this feminism, as you can see in the picture here, this rights for the working class and the little man and the improving of the labor conditions. They're rejecting individualism, which means they're embracing and pushing collectivism by definition. It says they had a rapidly growing interest in the communication and role between classes, those of which are generally referred to as the upper class, the working class, farmers, and themselves, the middle class, the managerial class. So that's kind of reminiscent of the Indian caste society with the four castes there as well. Along these lines, Jane Addams coined the term association as a counter to individualism. I thought that was very curious. It says associate with association, referring to the search for a relationship between the classes. I thought that was very curious because in our reading of this book, we're coming upon many associations, different groups, their councils and associations and institutes and There's a load of different boring, innocuous sounding words for them. But this threw a new light on the word association. Jane Addams says this is a counter to individualism. Jane Addams, maybe a member of the Addams family. Reformer, sociologist, public administrator, author, and philosopher. Continuing, the middle class, most notably women, began to move away from prior Victorian-era domestic values. Divorce rates increased as women preferred to seek education and freedom from the home. I would rather be working in an office, in a corporation, for a boss, than be trapped in the prison of my home. And of course, there's shades and gray areas to this. It's not all sunshine and roses at home for all women, right? But the point is that you should have an option. If you want to be a stay-at-home mom, it should be economically feasible and viable for that. And they've really taken that option off the table pretty much in most places now for most people. And it says here that Victorianism was thus pushed aside by the rise of progressivism. Not necessarily a good thing, not necessarily a bad thing, but undoubtedly Victorianism will have had some good things that were cast aside as progressivism came in with its credo of out with the old and in with the new. So there's a section here on leaders and activists of progressivism. We've got President Woodrow Wilson. We've also got another president down here, President Theodore Roosevelt. He was well into it. We've got loads. And as I said, this is a gigantic article. The only other section I wanted to look at, I think, is down here somewhere. I highlighted a bit. Yeah, the notable progressive leaders. So Jane Addams, social reformer. So remember, she said an association is a counterweight to individualism. Suffragist Susan B. Anthony. Charles Beard, historian and political scientist. Louis Brandeis, Supreme Court Justice. Very interesting person, and I'll mention at this point, there's an excellent channel called The History of Propaganda on YouTube. And from Dwayne, who runs that channel, I got a number of books that he talks about. And he does a similar thing to me. He's got documents and books, and he's reading stuff and showing you quotes, and his work's excellent in my opinion. But he told me about this book, which is The House of Truth, a Washington political salon and the foundations of American liberalism. And this is a pretty fat book. But it's all about progressivism. It's all about a little think tank called the House of Truth. They would get together and they would talk, and this included all these different characters: Oliver Wendell Holmes, Walter Lippmann, Felix Frankfurter, and Louis Brandeis is also featured in here as well. There he is, the future Justice Louis Brandeis. Yeah. So this group, they were getting together, they were pushing progressivism, and they were calling themselves members of the House of Truth. So there's another book for you to grab a hold of from WeLib. So we got Louis Brandeis. He was the Supreme Court Justice. We also had Andrew Carnegie, notable progressive leader. John Dewey, the philosopher who Rene Wormser talks about in this book, and others describe as being a relativist, a fairly ardent relativist who moved people away from objectivity and in truth and science. W.E.B. Du Bois, who's a scholar, and Abraham Flexner as well. Walter Lippmann, as we just saw in the House of Truth book there, which is by Snyder. John D. Rockefeller, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Elihu Root, Margaret Sanger, Upton Sinclair, Woodrow Wilson, and many, many others who I've never heard of before, but there is a whole bunch of names. You got presidential candidates, presidents, vice presidential candidates, politicians, advocates, reformers, mayors, lawyers, playwrights, novelists, suffragists, historians, conservationists, theologians, journalists, sociologists, everything. So many names that you can dive into, learn about progressivism, because all progressivism really means is, like I said, Out with the old, in with the new. And here is Frederick Winslow Taylor and his, I think, what should be an infamous quote, where he said, "In the past, the man has been first. In the future, the system must be first." So there you go. That's Frederick Winslow Taylor. He was a key inspiration and hero to the progressivists who were massively into their social science research. And I think that's it for our preamble ramble. I actually have more stuff to go into, but I want to get into the book because my throat's getting a little bit sore. And we're already nearly an hour and a half into the broadcast. We've got Trevor MacDonald in the chat. Hello. He says, "We will own everything and you won't afford nappies." Yes. Exactly. Justin says, "Got that book in the other day, just started it, cutting through." Yeah, it's awesome. I really highly recommend people get themselves a copy of. I mean, this is the second edition, the updated version with new art and lovely pictures, as you can see on the inside there. There's an older version, a Gorilla version as well, which is excellent, and it's bigger, so you can make notes and highlight and this is really beautiful. It's definitely a labor of love, and it's a stunning, high quality book, and you can get that at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. So I hope you enjoy reading that, Justin. Frank says, "Internet, bury the net deep into the ocean to catch as many fish, us, as possible." Oh, that's a good way of thinking about the word internet, yeah. Inter the net. So bury that net deep down. Yeah, and you know, that reminds me of what they say about, the collective noun for fish is school. A school of fish. And they put us through schooling, don't they? Oh, do you know what? I actually think I might go back to my preamble ramble, because the next section, we'll whiz through it, but it's worth mentioning. So, oh my goodness, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. So remember, we just learned here about, right near the top, we learned about the word association. Jane Addams coined the term association as a counter to individualism, yeah? We had a look at Frederick Winslow Taylor, who says the individual man used to be first, not anymore. Now it's the system. So the other thing I wanted to talk about on this preamble ramble very quickly, just to link it in, because it ties nicely to that last page, is the American Historical Association. So remember, part of what this interlock of foundations and groups does is it establishes the consensus. It establishes the norms, the professionalism, in other words, is a word we saw used actually. The professionalize certain disciplines, certain areas of occupation. So here's a good case study: the American Historical Association. So this is the oldest professional association of historians in the U.S., and it's got 11,000 members as of last year. It was founded in 1884. The AHA, it's called the AHA. The AHA works to protect academic freedom, develop professional standards, and support scholarship and innovative teaching. So does it really protect academic freedom? I wonder if there are any aspects of history that this association forbids the revision of. Be interesting to find that out. But it says about the activities that the AHA, the American Historical Association, the AHA, operates as an umbrella organization, which we mentioned at the start of this little preamble, for the discipline of history. Right, so you've got this umbrella organization for a particular discipline, and then and the effect of this is to standardize the groups, the smaller groups underneath it. It says, within the profession, the association defines ethical behavior and best practices. So what's interesting to me here is that they use the word define, because which implies that it's not that ethical behavior and best practices are self-evident, i.e. objectively true and can be established through a process of logical thinking and maybe a scientific methodology that would establish what is ethical behavior and what is best practice, right? It's like, no, we define the ethical behavior. We define the best practice. In other words, it's subjective because we get to choose what it is. We as the aha. And what is that? That aha is like the sound you make when you get one over on someone, or when you surprise them, or when you reveal that you've tricked them, or you catch them doing something. It's like, aha, But they define the ethical behavior and the best practices for the discipline of history. So that's quite a powerful group. It says it's got a statement on standards of professional conduct, which sets those behaviors and best practices. It also develops standards for good practice in teaching and history textbooks. So if you remember earlier in our book reading, we learned about sociology textbooks. And this book was mentioned, which I'll get on the record again to remind anybody, which is The Claims of Sociology, a Critique of Textbooks by A.H. Hobbes. And this talks about all the nonsense, the collectivism, and the relativism that is contained within a certain group of textbooks, and the topics such as what it was saying about marriage and the family, war, social change. That is one worth looking into also. So it's really a peek behind the curtain of how the spell is cast by way of textbooks, by way of umbrella organizations, defining ethical behavior and best practices. The AHA also administers fellowships, book prizes, and research grants. Probably nowhere near to the tune of the major foundations, but still doing a similar type of game. The history, it says the early leaders of the association were mostly gentlemen with the leisure and means to write many of the great 19th century works of history. So in other words, these are the people who were part of that leisure class, right? It says with the leisure, with the leisure. That means their income was secured because it was provided off by exploiting the labor of other people. And these are the ones, in other words, history is written by the victors. It's his story, okay? So it's quite interesting that line is in there about the history, the gentleman of leisure, not by the people. Because the whole thing about history is, ideally, you want to read the diaries and the journals and the letters of the people who lived through the events. And that's called primary source. That's a primary source. And then you've got most history is secondary source, which is people writing about events they did not live through and they did not experience. And their writing is based on what other people have written before them. And so you've got like secondary sources referring to secondary sources. And the primary sources are harder and harder to come across and find and dig up because they're kept in these archives. They're in the hives for the ark, which generally the public don't have access to. And maybe even if you do have access to it, when are you going to find the time to get yourself off to an archive to dig through those stacks, as John Taylor Gatto did in his research, and some other researchers as well, who were doing what they do pre-internet, So these gentlemen, with leisure, because their fortunes are made, I would argue, they're given the task to write these great works of history. They are the ones whose job it is to memory hold certain things, and as Orwell wrote in 1984, control the present, control the past, control the future. So that's the AHA. It says down here that not only were they interested in textbooks, but they also established a national history curriculum. So it says in 1896, the association appointed a committee of 7 And it has that in inverted commas, and it doesn't have a link to anything else or explain why it's in inverted commas. It's just a committee of 7, wink, wink. Like it's some inside joke to someone. I don't know who, not me, because I don't know what it means or why it's in inverted commas, but there it is. Anyway, this committee of 7 was appointed to develop a national standard for college admission requirements in history. So it's a national standard. So it's standardization, right? And you standardize it nationally, and then you standardize it internationally. There's this book published, The Study of History in Schools. That's 1898. And this report defines the way history would be taught at the high school level. So again, they're not empirically establishing it through experiment and tests, right? They're defining it. The committee recommended 4 blocks of Western history to be taught in chronological order, and they also advised that teachers tell a story and bring out the dramatic aspects to make history come alive. So that was kind of an early, that's a technique. That is a technique. That is drama. That is using fiction and entertainment to mold people's minds. Now, Alan Watt often said that most propaganda is delivered by way of entertainment and fiction. And this is kind of an admission that these two things are being sort of merged, right? You've got to make it entertaining and dramatic and turn it into a story. Otherwise, because they know people will pay more attention to that, and then they know they'll have a better chance at making the propaganda and the conditioning stick. This was a funny little section on professional misconduct. The association started to investigate professional misconduct, but gave it up in 2005, quote, because it has proven to be ineffective for responding to misconduct in the historical profession. So they tried to investigate professional misconduct, and they just couldn't. Obviously, the people who were carrying out that misconduct, obviously they're protected, and they weren't really making any progress, so they just gave it up. And there was a section here on resolutions. It said, the association historically avoided addressing contemporary politics and made no statements on the Vietnam War or South African apartheid. In 2007, the group Historians for Peace and Democracy presented a resolution against the Iraq War, which passed under President Barbara Weinstein. At the 2025 annual meeting, AHA members passed a resolution condemning alleged scholasticide in the Israel-Gaza war by a 428 to 88 vote. That sounds like democracy. Association elected council vetoed the resolution. The American Jewish Committee and the Academic Engagement Network criticized the proposal resolution as, quote, a misguided resolution which grossly undermines the rules of causal inference to advance a near obsessive anti-Israel narrative that casts the Jewish state as a uniquely malevolent aggressor. So the charge here is not what he's saying there is, oh, we're not the only ones doing this, so stop singling us out. That's what it's saying. That's basically his objection. It's like, it's not just us. There's plenty of people doing this kind of thing. Why are you just blaming? Why are you just pointing at us? Why are you singling us out? And then there was another complaint here from the ADL about this resolution, which said which refuted the allegation and accused the AHA of, quote, framing that perpetuates harmful biases and reinforces narratives that marginalize Jewish voices. I mean, the idea that Jewish voices are marginalized is preposterous when you look at the amount of money that goes into and the amount of influence that groups like the ADL has, right? Or if you look at the positions that Jewish people tend to occupy in media, in Hollywood, in publishing in general, right? The idea that their voices are marginalized is actually laughable. That's why I just chuckled. But yeah, quite an interesting little bit there. It looks like they did attempt to be on the right side of history, but they got a slapped wrist. And that's it, really. That's all I wanted to mention about this American Historical Association. But just with a focus on this word association and a reminder the way you see it, according to Jane Addams, this is telling you this is a counter to individualism. And so that is the end of our preamble ramble, for real this time, honestly. But yeah, I just saw that tab as I was moving things around here, and I thought, oh yeah, actually, it's worth getting that onto the live stream because it fits nicely. So I hope you're all doing well out there, and if you are seeing this, please drop a comment or a like or something just to indicate that you are like. We've got stuff going on in the YouTube chat, which is lovely. Odyssey and Rumble is DED. It is dead over there. But that's okay. That's all good because people can catch up on the replay. So we are going to get into today's reading. Before we do, I'll just remind you, allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. If you want to support, if you want to get in touch, follow my social media, which is probably the 21st century's biggest oxymoron. It's either social media or social distancing. Maybe social distancing. But yeah, you can check out all my stuff there, allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. You can sign up for my ultimate reading list, which is a PDF download of all the books in my library. There's actually like 30 new books that aren't on that list. I need to update it, but there's still over 800 books on there, organized by theme. You can look at continuityofcontrol.com, which is a sort of email mini course delivered to your inbox, 1 email a week, 5-minute reads, packed full of quotes from some of the most insane establishment figures to curse the world with their presence over the last 70 years. And if you want to shoot me an email, it's nick@hayesreviews.com. I like hearing from people. I like being reminded when I get things wrong, or I forget to say things, or I don't mention a particular resource that is useful, or any helpful, constructive feedback you can give. I welcome it and appreciate receiving it by way of email, nick@hayesreviews.com, to get in touch. Okay, let's carry on with today's chapter. I'm going to have to just adjust my position and my microphone and my book cam and get comfy, because this chapter is number 8, The Ford Foundation, Gargantua of Philanthropy. And I'm just going to skip ahead to see how long we got. How long is this chapter? Because if it's massive, we might have to do it, spread it over this. I have a feeling it's quite a long chapter. Yeah. So this chapter is coming in at 66 pages. So I hope everyone is eager to learn about the Ford Foundation, because that is what we're going to be covering today and next week. And in fact, this chapter is so long that maybe next week we won't do a preamble ramble. Maybe we'll just get straight into the book. Otherwise, it'll take us straight into the chapter. Sorry. Yeah. Otherwise, it's going to take us too long to get through it. This is easily, I think, the longest chapter so far. So there must be a lot to say. So what did they discover about the Ford Foundation? Where's my pencil? Oh dear. It's not here. One sec. Let me find it. I had it yesterday. Because I was finishing reading The Story of Nowhere and marking up some quotes for when I talk to Daniel McCarthy later today. But now the pencil is gone. And now I'm embarrassed because I don't even have a backup pencil. I just have one pencil. How terrible is that? Okay, we're going to have to forge on ahead without a pencil. So for those of you who like to watch me annotate and draw boxes around things as we read, I am sorry, but I've let you down. So let's get into it. Chapter 8, the Ford Foundation, Gargantua of Philanthropy. And this section is called A New Policy? Question mark. Among the giant foundations, the Ford Foundation is by far the largest. It was established in 1936. In 1949, the trustees finally arrived at a definitive program to, quote, carry out the broader purposes envisaged for the foundation by its founders and benefactors, and to recognize within the framework of policies supposedly established by Henry Ford and his son, Edsel. This program was the result of a mountain of labor by a committee of advisors under the leadership of H. Rowan Geither, who later became president of the foundation. The result did not differ greatly from the pattern of operations of earlier foundations, such as those of Carnegie, Rockefeller, Sage, and others created for social and scholarly purposes. The one real novelty in the Ford operation was its size. It administered billions in capital and an annual income of some $100 million. The challenge and the responsibility of this wealth are beyond comparison with any historic precedent. The power to spend these trust funds for good or for bad, or simply to piddle them away in squandering ventures called for precautions in decision-making far more serious than those required in a business enterprise. In 1956, Dr. Henry T. Heald, formerly president of New York University, became president of the Ford Foundation, succeeding Mr. Gaither, who was moved up from president to chairman of the board. The appointment of Dr. Heald was encouraging, not only because of his ability, character, and experience, but also because it may indicate a growing awareness on the part of the trustees of the many grave mistakes which had been made by the foundation during the years which followed the adoption of the 1949 platform. There are some signs that Dr. Heald realizes that household alterations are in order. He has stated in public utterances that the Foundation's program is subject to continuous review and evaluation, that existing programs are sometimes dropped, and that changes and the creation of new programs follow only upon careful study. He must certainly understand the importance of the Foundation's directive personnel, and while only limited alterations have been made to date in the personnel setup, a new broom cannot, after all, always sweep clean overnight. Dr. Heald stated in one address that 4/5 of the money spent by the Foundation to the end of 1956, about $1 billion, was devoted to education, or schooling, to put its proper word, to put its proper label on it. His emphasis on schooling, it says education. I might just swap that word out though. Remember, a school of fish, it's called schooling because the fish respond as one. They respond as one. When there's a threat, they all change direction at the same time. This is what you are trained to do when you go through schooling, aka education. But it's not really education. Anyway, his emphasis on education is in itself very encouraging. However, he used the term education in its broadest sense. For a foundation, quote, that attempts to work for the public welfare, the principal instrument through which it can work, he said, is education in general and higher education in particular. In supporting this statement, he uses an argument typical of foundation executives, the alleged need for social change and the benefits of such change. He suggests that it is virtually impossible to make real and lasting progress for mankind without education and its constant extension in scope and improvement in quality. This statement is beyond questioning, but he explains further. Quote, by definition, improvement implies and involves change. Change is not something to fear or avoid. Change is not only inevitable, but desirable. Problems are solved, ills corrected, progress made by change. That's going to be British Labour Party's new slogan next time, I think. Progress made by change. When they get kicked out, we get fed up with them, and we vote the Tories back in, and then I say we. Definitely not me showing up for at the voting booth to put my magic X in the box. But yeah, that's a good slogan, isn't it? Problems are solved, ills corrected, progress made by change. Continuing, he does add, quote, but first there must be an admission, a recognition that a problem exists. Then men of good will must go about changing things. However, this qualification seems to miss the possibility that, as to many problems, change is not desirable. To illustrate, a democracy is certainly inefficient. Thus a problem exists. That does not mean that change from a democracy is desirable. To illustrate again, a problem is created by the fact that a centralized government could accomplish many functions far more effectively than a federal system. Does that mean that a change is needed or desirable? Dr. Heald adds, if nothing needs changing, then we are all wasting our time and our resources, for there is nothing really to be done except to feed and clothe people. This emphasis on change is classic among the executives of the concentration of power. There is, after all, much that a foundation can do which does not involve promoting change, in addition to feeding and clothing people. No one in his right mind would assert that no improvements in our society are possible or desirable, but the emphasis on change by the newly elected president of the largest foundation in the world implies an eagerness to pursue what Professor Colgrove has called the pathological approach to research. Dr. Heald believes in the power of man to leave the world a better place than it was when he entered it. This is a proposition which, again, one can readily accept, but is it true, as he says, that the challenge can only be met by changing the environment in which man finds himself? Always we hope for the better, always working for social and economic improvements in the lot of all people. Does this concern for betterment in the material world of social and economic improvement not indicate a neglect of the non-material, the spiritual values, which have at least as much importance as the physical? What could be more obvious than that change is desirable when it is desirable? But the emphasis so frequently put by foundation leaders on, quote, change, often results in advocating change because it is change, as though there were a certainty of improvement if there were a change. Yeah, change for change's sake, in other words. Dr. Heald has adopted the risk capital and experimentation concepts. It's not yet clear whether his interpretation of these two terms follows the general line of the complex. It's encouraging to have him say that a foundation sometimes should even support the exploration of unpopular ideas. A dedication to the support of the nonconformist is most laudable, and we can only hope that it is followed. The Ford Foundation has not demonstrated this dedication in the past. Quite to the contrary, it has, in most instances, supported the ruling clique of materialistic social scientists who once were a minority, but long since have become, with Foundation assistance, a clear majority. I regret that I have not seen in any of Dr. Heald's public utterances any consciousness of the danger of supporting this type of conformity. In many areas, this ruling clique in the social sciences, so well supported by the Ford Foundation and others, advocates change of institutions, principles, and methods, and of social, economic, and political mechanisms which a great many people, in some instances a vast majority of the people, wish to have retained as they are. Where is the support for those who wish to protect something we have against well-financed movements to change it? Is only the man who wants to change something to be given foundation support? In Dr. Heald's public statements, I have found much to be admired and applauded. If I am critical or questioning of some of his remarks, it is to bring into focus problems of foundation theory and management, which, I believe, sorely need attention and discussion. In an address of April 4th, 1957, for example, he touches on the problem of foundation responsibility by saying that education extends beyond the academic world and into the atmosphere of society, which is made up of beliefs and ambitions of the aggregate of its members. He follows with this statement, quote, This is where foundations, among others, have an appropriate role to play, not in the shaping of those beliefs and ambitions, but in helping to provide people concerned with them and competent to understand, maintain, and realize them. Just what does this mean? Is it possible to provide people competent to realize ambitions without in turn being responsible for the contents of what these people maintain? Can one intentionally deal with change without being responsible for the change which one finances? If a foundation makes grants to improve governmental processes, how can it avoid entering the field of politics and partisan action? What constitutes improvement? Such a term involves value concepts and therefore offers a problem not subject to solution through a scientific method of approach free of preconceived political concepts of value. So many foundation executives seem to fail to see the determining influence of a priori assumptions of the desirable, of the socially commendable, and of similar yardsticks for judgment. For this reason, they do not seem to realize how much of what they do is political. Here is an example. The spending of $63 million to advance international understanding, desirable as this goal may appear, is the result of a priori assumptions regarding ethical and practical values, ultimate purposes, and potentials. There can be no possible objection to the relief of the poor and sick, wherever they may suffer. But the expenditure of $58 million in overseas development programs, quote, to help the emerging new democratic nations of the world to help themselves, cannot be separated from an inherent political intention or from such a priori assumptions as that these nations are democratic, that their democracy, if they have it, is good for them, that the adoption of some democratic processes necessarily results in the adoption of democratic ideas of peace and justice, that immediate institution of democracy in these undeveloped nations is good for mankind, and that democracy is better nurtured if supported from the outside than if it stands up on its own feet. I do not mean to conjecture which, if any, of these assumptions are wrong, but to emphasize that they are a priori assumptions. I really wish I had my pencil. I would mark up that whole paragraph because he's making excellent points here. And it's part of the reason that I was drawn to Jay Dyer, for example, quite a few years back when I first was introduced to his work. I liked that he talked about presuppositions, and he did presuppositional critique on various worldviews and ways of looking at things and philosophy. And that's exactly what Worms is doing here, and I think it's a great example of how to dismantle and inspect the rhetoric of anybody, really, but especially quote-unquote leaders and experts and those who are put in front of us as the people to make decisions and lead the way that we all should follow, right? Being able to critique somebody's presuppositions of the things they're saying is a very fruitful way to have a discussion and a debate. Now, most people will look at you in a very confused way if you start to talk to them about presuppositions and you start to ask the kind of questions that Wormser just gave as an example here, because they won't have thought about them. They won't even realize that the things that they're saying contain these presuppositions and a priori assumptions. They don't know that they have those. They haven't brought them to light. These are kind of subconscious, unconscious assumptions that they're making with their language that they've never inspected to see whether or not they can stand behind them. And this causes a lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding, and a lot of disagreement. And it gets in the way of people building connections and finding common ground on on various topics, but it's a good way to try and find common ground, right? And so if somebody holds some position that you disagree with, rather than going with the head-on straightforward attack, no, you're wrong, and going with the opposite, because you end up like the two north poles of a magnet, just repelling each other. What you want to do instead is find that assumption, that a priori assumption, and that presupposition that you both agree on, right? So it might be, let's say you're disagreeing about intramuscular injections, to use a J.J. Couey term, or transfection is to use another one. Let's say you're disagreeing with somebody about this. What you can agree on is that you both care about health, and that might be your children's health, right? One parent might say, no, I don't want to give my child injections. Another one says, I need to give this child as many injections as are available. Well, you can, instead of focusing on your butting heads on that issue, I'm for it, you're against it. Instead of that, you can say, look, what we both agree on here is that we want our children to be healthy, right? Right. Start from there. Start from that a priori assumption that you do agree on, and find that common ground there, and then build from there. And we can't both be right about this issue, can we? No, we can't. Okay, so let's take the time to look into the information we have that's verifiable. Where does it come from? What do we know? What can we agree on? And build a case from there and see how we arrived at our different conclusions. And it's time consuming and it's painstaking. And the problem is we don't get taught how to do this at school, which is when we should be taught how to do this, or by our parents, which is at home is the other place where we should be taught how to do this. And so most people don't have this skill set. So if only one person has the skill set, it's not going to work. You need both people to have it. And this is where you get into a presentation that I've shared here before about intellectual self-defense, which I think is very, very good. Maybe I should dig it up and share it again. I'm trying to find the website. It's ireader.tv. It is ireader.tv. So let me go to this website quickly. I just locked my desktop, which is not what I intended to do. And I'll show you this excellent course that I've mentioned before. I'll try and fix my lighting as well. Where we're at. Does that help? No, not really. And the course it's on this website somewhere. So it's ireader.tv. You can go to intellectual self-defense. So if you go on the menu at the top, they've got a podcast, loads of videos, interviews, various people. Lots of non-controversial topics such as fluoride, fractional reserve banking, COVID, Ukraine. But if you go to the burger menu at the top right, and then you go to intellectual self-defense here, then there's what used to be, here it is. So you scroll down, you got this 4 circuits of human interaction, and there's 3 parts to this. And you can listen to the audio, or you can watch the video and the presentation. And these are really good presentations, in my opinion. And these 4 circuits are the 4 levels that you can be interacting with someone on. Now, the key thing to bear in mind and take away is that if somebody is on a lower level than you can't beat them with the higher level stuff, right? It's like logic, right? If somebody is illogical, you can't help them with logic. Logic is going to bounce off them. It's just not going to land. It's not going to have any effect because they are not logical people, right? And then you have to go down to their level if you want to have some influence there. And typically that's like emotional. That's going to be more kind of what's the word? Rather than argumentation and logic and evidence, it's going to be how you present yourself, your energy, your volume, your tone, your body language, and these kinds of things, right? They're going to be more important. So it's important to be able to recognize what level somebody else is on before you try and engage with them using these kind of ideas about presuppositions and a priori assumptions and the logic and the evidence of certain positions, right? So that's a caveat and a warning. But I really like this course. It's probably about time that I revisit it actually and refresh my memory, because this Four Circuits one is a game changer, and then they build one on the other. So then you get the line of reasoning, which is how you also approach these types of discussions, find where the break with reality is happening in this line of reasoning. And then the chain of responsibility also builds on that idea as well. Really, really great presentation. Nice mini course. Just a few hours long. So the website there is irida.tv, IRIDA.tv, and look for intellectual self-defense. And yeah, you can thank me later. Let's get back to our reading now. Justin says, you got your coffee ready? Good. Me too. I've got my coffee right here. All right. Justin says, take a break and find a pencil. I am tempted to do that, and I think I know where it is. So give me 2 seconds. I'm going to run out of the room and go and grab my pencil. I got it. Here it is. Okay, I got my pencil. Now we can continue. So I just I really like what Worms is doing here. I think he's very articulate. He's clearly a rational and logical thinker, and he's not trying to be melodramatic. He's not trying to rile people up and pull on your emotions with this book. It's not alarmist, right? It's not, oh, you'll never believe what these guys are doing now, you know, with the thumbnail. You won't believe what he's just done. Whoa, with the arrows on the thumbnail for the YouTube video. You know, it's not that kind of tone. It's a very logical, rational, sensible, calm approach, an explanation of some of the problems that might be there. He's not even pointing the finger and the blame game so much. He's very even-handed all the way through this. He says he's not assuming malevolence, but he is asking some very pertinent questions about the way these groups operate and their money and the ideology, and pointing to other artifacts and evidence as well, which is really good. As I mentioned, I've got a lot of books off the back of reading this one. But let's continue here. In an address on April 8th, 1957, Dr. Heald, discussing the responsibilities of private philanthropy, indicates an awareness that the responsibility of foundations to the public goes beyond the mere publication of reports. Foundation activities, he says, involve risk, and they require intelligence, judgment, and wisdom. Their ultimate success or failure forms the basis on which the foundations will be judged by the public they serve, and which gives them the freedom and the opportunity they enjoy. Yeah, so they technically should be beholden to the public, if you know what I mean, right? Not beholden to the public, but they should be transparent, and they should be so transparent as to be beyond suspicion, because it's like, well, look, we can see everything they're doing, where the money's going. We know exactly what their ideology is or lack thereof. We can see that they're objective. We can see that they're, you know, funding equally conservatives and progressives, for example, or liberals and progressives, liberals and conservatives. You know what I mean? Two sides of an issue, but this is not the case. So continuing, going back here, But then Dr. Heald seems to fall into an error conventional to the manager of the, quote, concentration. He identifies the responsibilities of a foundation in terms of the promotion of concepts of value. He speaks of a foundation's freedom to discriminate, to take chances, to try to identify the good and make it better. This amounts not to a mere support of controversy, but to an actual taking of sides on controversial issues. There is no general agreement on what is good for society. In a democratic society, the decision of what is good for it, what is right, and what is wrong, in effect, is decided by a majority. The injection of foundation power into the democratic process by which the majority makes these value decisions creates an imbalance interfering with the concept that public affairs should be controlled by the free will of the people. The freedom referred to by Dr. Heald implies belief in an intellectually aristocratic elite of foundation managers with the right to influence our fate. Consistently with this elite concept, he speaks of the opportunity and responsibility to pioneer ahead of public opinion, to do things that might not, at the time they are done, be approved by popular vote, so anti-democratic, in other words. To be ahead, but not too far ahead. Such a right to be ahead of the people can be exercised by an individual if he cares to exercise it. Whether such a right is attributable to a juridical person operating with public trust funds is highly questionable. To pioneer ahead of public opinion means indulging directly or indirectly in propaganda of a kind that is the sole privilege of the citizen and not the right of a tax-exempt organization. I agree with Dr. Heald that, quote, stimulating the development of ideas is a legitimate concern of foundations, but the development function should be left to others. The foundation should confine itself to giving competing forces a fair and equal chance. There you go. And that is, of course, not at all what they were found to be doing in the Cox Committee and then in the Rees Committee. Only if equal chance is given can free competition in the marketplace of ideas take place. Ah, what a idealistic utopian idea that is. Free competition in the marketplace of ideas. And people would say, oh, well, that's what we've got now, because we've got Twitter and we've got X and we've got Facebook and we've got all these social media, and that's the marketplace of ideas, and it's free, totally free from censorship and algorithmic suppression and shadow banning and all these things, right? Continuing, Dr. Heald describes the Ford Foundation's hope of serving our society and thus advancing human welfare in general in this manner, quote, first, to identify existing centers of excellence and contribute to their continued improvement, and second, to help the number of these centers increase. In selecting these centers, the Foundation expects to find individuals, departments, organizations, or entire institutions whose curiosity in the realm of ideas holds most promise, as far as this can be determined for tomorrow's world. This statement again suggests value judgments of a political nature. It is a program which could only be accepted as just and sound if equal chance were given to competing ideas and to the respective representatives or defenders of these ideas. I do not see how those in positions like Dr. Heald's can forget that the tax exemption privilege is granted by all the people, irrespective of their creeds, ideas, and political goals. How can a foundation rightly exhibit partisan preferences at the expense of that part of the public which does not support these preferences? Tax exemption does not make foundations the guardians of the nation in the world of ideas and in planning for the future. Quote, the Ford Foundation is interested in improving American society, says its president. He says that experiments and research underwritten by the foundation may not be uniformly popular and probably should not be. Problems in the social sciences are not problems of which everyone is aware or on whose easy solution everyone agrees. Yet it is part of the foundation function to cruise ahead of popular notions, to risk being sniped at when there is a valid gain to be made. This, it seems to me, is the, quote, social engineering concept gone wild. Is it not presumptuous of foundation administrators to assume that their choice of values is superior to that of others? Yeah, very well said. Social engineering concept gone wild. That's a good quote from the book. Quote, "Ye shall be as gods, said the serpent in paradise, in offering the forbidden fruit, knowing good and evil." It is my own hope that Dr. Heald will take the time to challenge conventional concepts of foundation management, such as I have criticized above, and to think through on his own the difficult problems involved. As the chief administrator of the largest tax-exempt fund in our history, he owes this duty to the people. Next section we've got here is the recent past. The annual report of the Ford Foundation for 1956, signed by Mr. Gaither, contains the latest statements of the Foundation's policies. As I shall explain later, the Foundation started with 5 major areas of proposed activity. It's now extended into 23 major project areas. It continues its plan to set up successive, now self-contained funds under separate boards of management, thus delegating its jurisdiction and trust functions to others. The report makes much of the relinquishment of control of the Foundation by the Ford family. This step might have been desirable from several points of view, including the desirability of shifting any onus of responsibility from the controlling proprietors of the Ford Motor Company. But the shift from family control to a self-perpetuating bureaucratic control may not have been so commendable. It took the risk of a characteristic breeding of power cliques of administrators and the use of resources for political ends instead of charitable donations. Having been given control of the Foundation, the trustees, says Mr. Gaither, quote, accepted the challenge of the maturing concept of American Foundation philanthropy, in which emphasis had shifted over a period of some 40 years from the effects of social problems to their causes. They agree that the resources of the Foundation should be committed to the solution of problems constituting grave threats or obstacles to human progress, such as the growing demands on the educational structure and the need for improved understanding of and between men and nations. No one could disagree with the desirability of solving the problems which Mr. Gaither mentions, but solutions for such problems are chiefly political. Foundations which take the initiative, the propagandistic leadership for social change, cease to be philanthropic in the legal meaning of the term and enter into the political arena where they do not belong. The choice of measures to remove unfavorable causes in our body social is clearly a political partisan matter, so in effect is the defining of what constitutes progress. Contrary to the belief, and remember if we go back to the Wikipedia page on progressivism, progress is constituted by scientific management of society, of scientific governance of people, of getting women the vote and out of the freedom from the home into the workforce, these kinds of movements. Contrary to the belief prevalent among some foundations, the currently foundation orthodox ideas about progress and the need for change are not universally accepted. There is a noticeable and vehement revolt among American thinkers who oppose materialistic concepts of progress and pragmatic solutions of problems, basing their distaste for them on religious or philosophical convictions. A good illustration of this revolt is to be found in an address delivered by Dr. Ralph Cooper Hutchinson, president of Lafayette College, on March the 21st, 1957, under the auspices of the Committee of Sponsors of the Greater Philadelphia Council of Churches. In this address, he inveighed against the assault of scientific humanism on ideals. And remember, scientific humanism is part of the manifesto of UNESCO as detailed and authored and written and defined, to use that word again, by Julian Huxley, who's Aldous Huxley's older brother. He named 4 teachings of scientific humanism which constitute particular dangers. One is that all is natural and all truth is subject to discovery and determination through science. As a consequence, he said, there is no higher law, no law written in the heart, no law on the tables of stones, no law revealed in the sublimities of nature, maybe, no law in the inner conscience, no law of God. He described a second danger, quote, as the belief, following the lead of Bacon, Lenin, Hogben, and Bernal, that there are no values save material and scientific realities. The third danger, he says, is that the objective of all life is deemed to be, quote, social progress. Here, he continues, is one of the greatest values and greatest vices of scientific humanism, because, of course, social progress is good. The scientific humanist has arbitrarily inherited and adopted the concept from the Christian ethic. But he makes it the supreme good and only goal. Social progress is the only norm, the only ideal, the only objective. All other values are dismissed. It's another good section there. Again, it's a similar thing. It's a sort of presuppositional critique, looking at the a priori assumptions built in to statements such as social progress is good, change is good, progressivism is good, we have to progress, we have to change, right? Since quote, social progress is the only value to scientific humanism, said Dr. Hutchinson in describing its fourth danger, the end justifies the means. That's a real key takeaway with regards to progressivism, scientific management, socialism, communism. So I'll just read that bit. Dr. Hutchinson, in describing its fourth danger, the end justified the means which may be coercive and ignore the rights of the individual. There you go. So all these associations, remember, these are organizations set up to undercut, to diminish, to remove the rights of the individual. Quote, all the developing power of science is to be used to bring about the social progress desired, hence the use of laws to achieve social progress. We are going along with these evils, continued Dr. Hutchinson, inflamed by the fad for social progress and reform. We have given up the teaching of social idealism and have embarked on what we call liberal movements. We are achieving social progress by legislation. Instead of persuading men, we command them. In our moral judgments, we have gone over into the enemy's territory because while not denying God, it is becoming very common to deny any higher law. We have substituted an opportunistic and relative ethic for the absolute. We are becoming a compromising, relativistic, uncertain people, recognizing no absolute right or wrong, no higher law. And this is a key theme of the book, actually, is this movement towards relativism and how these philanthropic, tax-exempt foundations and organizations played a huge role in that transformation. So continuing here. Have any foundation administrators the moral and ethical right to ignore the position of the great number of intelligent Americans who think as does Dr. Hutchinson, and to direct the trust funds which these administrators disburse solely or predominantly to those of the opposing point of view? There is one hopeful sign in the broadening which the extension of the Ford Foundation's original platform indicates. This broadening at least exhibits some flexibility. We can only hope that the foundation will move further and further away from the temptation to adjust our body politic to blueprints designed by ideological and political factions. This is so important in the case of the Ford Foundation because of its immense size. Its errors can be huge errors, gigantic in impact. It has no peer in size or potential. When the Ford Foundation takes sides, who can be its match? How can there be a fair test of ideas? The managers of the foundation seem to have an exaggerated sense of mission and importance, without apparently realizing how much it applies to his own foundation. Mr. Gaither quotes Dr. Raymond B. Fosdick, former president of the Rockefeller Foundation, as follows, quote, "Every social agency, including a foundation, has within it not only the seeds of possible decay, but a tendency to exalt the machinery of organization above the purposes for which the organization is created." That's a good quote from Raymond B. Fosdick. And I'll just remind people as well that if you go to the playlists tab on the channel, you will find a full read-through of this book, The Story of the Rockefeller Foundation by Raymond B. Fosdick. This book, since I got my copy, the price has gone up. It's one of those. It has not got cheaper. But this is the history of the Rockefeller Foundation as written by the president of the Rockefeller Foundation himself, right? So it's not conspiracy text. As Richard Grove points out, this is them in their own words. And so that book in full is read on the channel under the playlist tab. That'd be a nice accompanying book actually to go along with this one, or maybe to read while you're waiting for the next installment of Foundations. You can listen to in parallel you can listen to The Story of the Rockefeller Foundation. But a good quote there from Raymond B. Fosdick. Very true what he says. This is about this links back to the quote we saw from Frederick Taylor, Taylorism, where the man will not be so important anymore, and actually the system will supersede man in its importance. That's kind of what he's saying here, is the machinery of the organization will be exalted instead of the purpose for which the organization is created, which is to benefit man. You might be able to hear my son in the background there making a little contribution to today's live stream. He's going through that phase where whenever you put him down, he protests. Likes to be picked up and carried around all day, every day, so because he has a better view when he's higher up, right? Because he's quite short, even though he's very tall for his age. He's quite short compared to fully grown people. All right, so continuing here with this section, the recent past. We might just finish this section and then wrap it up. Mr. Gaither's belief that the foundation should decide what social problems exist, endeavor to determine their causes, and find measures to remedy them expresses an excessus mandati. Mr. Gaither deems the philanthropic process as, quote, at best a reasonable system of providing resources and opportunities for men capable of creative thinking in what has been described as a gigantic bet on the improvability of man. This is again tampering with law and with the body social. There are responsible schools of thought which do not believe in the improvability of man, and this includes the Christian religions. What Mr. Gaither propounds as a brand of foundation philosophy is the old Pelagian heresy of the 5th century, opposed by Augustine and later by the Reformation. I do not profess the competence to discuss whether man is improvable or not, but the massive body of opinion against it would indicate that a foundation should steer carefully clear of basing a disposition of its vast funds on the support of the improvability theory. Of course, Mr. Gaither may not have meant what he said. He may have meant merely the improvability of man's conditions, or the improvability of man's education, or something like that. If that be so, a lesson is apparent. Foundation managers should not try to be philosophers, or at least not attempt to select brands of philosophy upon which to base the support of research. Such decisions are far too dangerous for Foundation managers to handle. And I'm reminded of at this point as well, something that Alan Watt often talks about, which is that this deviant priesthood, this class of culture creators and the dominant minority who have withheld ancient knowledge of human psychology and group dynamics and the creation of religious systems and cultural systems of control. This group consider their mission or their purpose to perfect that which was left imperfect by the Creator, right? So this applies to man. So that's why this partly at least feeds into the transhumanism agenda, this agenda to merge the sexes or get rid of the sexes altogether and create this genetically modified version of man, the new version of man, which reproduces itself and is the perfect obedient slave, basically. So that's the direction of improvability of man, according to Alan Watt's estimation of this deviant priesthood. But yeah, it is quite an amazing thing to think that you can improve upon what the Creator did when humans' scientific knowledge can't even go so far as to create, a plant or a fish or a or very simple microorganisms even. Although maybe we can do that at this point, I'm not sure. There's a lot of funding going into these bio labs in various places around the world. You got Porton Down, and you got the Ukraine bioweapons labs, and of course Wuhan. But maybe on the very tiny level we can sort of make these things, but we can't make anything like a jellyfish, or a plant that produces a new kind of fruit, right? We're just so inadequate and inefficient and incapable when you take the view that this reality was created by an entity. It has intelligence behind the design, and therefore it has a purpose. So yeah, that's what I would point out and say to that. This gigantic bet on the improvability of man, in a word, is pure hubris. And I think he did mean improving man. My guess would be that somebody in this position is going to be in on the know, at least to a certain degree. I use that word deliberately. But knowing that man is to be improved scientifically, improved to what end and for what purposes, that's the real question. Who defines what improvement is? Who decides and defines what progress is? Who decides and defines what ethical best practice is? In the case of the American Historical Society that we looked at in the preamble ramble, they think they get to define and decide these kinds of things. So it's no surprise to me to find this level of arrogance and hubris in the president of the Ford Foundation. But let's get back to the text. I don't even know whereabouts I was. Oh yeah, here. There are some encouraging features in Mr. Gaither's report. He recognizes the responsibility of a foundation for the results of its grants, at least to the extent of seeing the need of examination and review. He says, quote, "The foundation retains a continuing responsibility to review and evaluate the grantee's accomplishments under the grant. If the foundation should conclude that it has fallen short of the objective, or that a grantee has exhibited poor judgment in a series of events over a substantial period of time, the foundation has the inherent right, and indeed the obligation, to withhold further support for such a grantee. Thus, the responsibility for making judgments cannot be evaded by those whose responsibility it is to administer the resources of philanthropy." Good points. I would hope that Mr. Gaither and others like him would also come to the point of recognizing the social duty to take such corrective or remedial action as may be possible when a project has turned out badly or unfairly. Although there was an account earlier in this book about how that did not happen, and actually what tended to be the pattern was that foundations would sort of wash their hands and say, well, we can't be responsible for that. And they'll take the praise when something good comes out of their funding and the money that they dole out and dish out. But when something bad happens, if some organization, some group, some research, some policymaker, some recipients of this grant money turn out to have ideological leanings towards leftism, subversion, communism, socialism, then they'll just sort of wash their hands and say, "Oh, there's nothing to do with us. We can't be responsible," right? So, continuing, encouraging too was the 1956 grant to Harvard, even though in the small sum of $25,000 for improving the understanding of American capitalism. How rarely indeed is such a grant to be found among lists of major foundation benefactions? Grants for change, yes. Grants to defend that capitalism upon which our nation has grown strong, that capitalism which gave birth to the Ford Foundation, that capitalism which has been under trip hammer attack by a multitude of foundation-supported intellectuals, have been almost as rare as hen's teeth. One reported grant of $195,000 to Columbia University is more difficult to understand, though it may indicate a friendlier attitude toward business. It is for a study of the legal, business, and political problems of joint international business ventures, such as the oil consortium of Iran. Such studies could be well left to the managements of the wealthy corporations involved in such international deals. Eminently discouraging in Mr. Gaither's report is evidence of the continued extensive use of intermediary organizations to disperse the foundation's money. So these intermediary organizations, remember, this was what we were looking at in the preamble ramble today, focusing on the... how can I not remember this? We just talked about it for 40 minutes at the start of the live stream. You can tell when I've been going for too long. I can't even remember. The Social Science Research Council, that's it. I didn't want to guess and get it wrong. So that was an intermediary group, just acting as the middlemen, basically. But it's also a gatekeeping function. So I'll redo that. That's the beginning of that paragraph there. Eminently discouraging in Mr. Gaither's report is evidence of the continued extensive use of intermediary organizations to disperse the foundation's money. Among these prominently are the Social Science Research Council, there you go, and the allegedly non-partisan Foreign Policy Association, now under the partisan presidency of Vera Michelle Dean. More astounding are the grants to other foundations, for example, to the Russell Sage Foundation, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and the Whitney Foundation. The connections with other foundations are so numerous, there seems almost to be a mixture of management. In the most important field of the behavioral sciences, for instance, an advisory committee assists a foundation in the selection of recipient universities. Among the members of this committee, in addition to the directors of the Foundation Finance Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences, are Charles Dollard of the Carnegie Endowment, Hans Speer of the Rand Corporation, Donald Young of the Russell Sage Foundation, and Fillmore Sanford of the American Psychological Association. Messrs. Dollard and Young are very familiar names. They selected Stuart Chase to do the proper study of mankind, the exposition of the current social science orthodoxy. Their names appear again and again in Foundation operations. Hans Speer, before coming to this country and serving as a professor at the New School for Social Research, and later as director of the Social Studies section of the super-secret Rand Corporation, had contributed extensively to radical socialist publications, especially to Rudolf Hilferding's Die Gesellschaft in Germany. Here's another example. The report describes a committee of 5, which assists the foundation in awarding grants in aid to individual scholars. Of this committee of 5, one is the same Hans Speer, a second is the same Charles Dollard, a third is the same Donald Young. On the very next page of the report appears the name of Professor Paul Lazarsfeld of Columbia, who is reported to be engaged in directing the improvement of advanced training in social research. He, too, is a standard character, appearing again and again on the rolls of the foundation favored. Are our academies so bereft of scholarship that foundations must use the same few technicians over and over again? Good quote. Good point to highlight. The sorry story of the Fund for the Republic, that strange child of the Ford Foundation, has embarrassed its parent, which has sought to shift responsibility by repeatedly affirming the complete independence of the fund. But there seem to be left vestiges of the spirit which caused the Fund for the Republic to be created. On page 42 of the report is a picture of Joseph Welch, who was selected to appear on a television program to expound on the, quote, Constitution's protection of individual civil liberties. Mr. Welch is a lawyer who came into national prominence as the opponent of the late Senator McCarthy. There is a definite controversy associated with the term civil liberties, a controversy in which Mr. Welch took a fervent side. However excellent a lawyer he may be, to have selected him to discuss civil liberties was an exercise of political partisanship. Similarly, on page 36 of the 1956 Ford Foundation report appears a picture of Professor Zachariah Chaffee of Harvard conducting a regular TV course on human rights. Professor Chaffee was an eminent and very articulate partisan in the controversy over civil liberties, human rights, and the Fifth Amendment. He was also an endorser of many pro-communist causes. In his speeches and writings, he supported and expounded the same position taken by Dr. Hutchins and by the propaganda of the Fund for the Republic. Grave issues are involved, including the extent to which the doctrine of states' rights applies to restrict federal action, the relative importance and leverage of the various individual liberties granted by the Constitution and the amendments, the significance of the constitutional reservation of unenumerated basic rights to the people, the proper powers of congressional committees, the significance and proper use of the Fifth Amendment, the propriety and legality of methods used to fight communism, and others. On these issues, the Ford Foundation has enlisted its enormous power on one side. How was the other side represented? It was not represented. One can only conclude that it was the intention and purpose of the Ford Foundation. One can only conclude that it was the intention and purpose of the Ford Foundation to propagandize for one side of these grave issues. Such a taking of sides by a foundation must surely be condemned bitterly. In the case of the Ford Foundation, its gargantuan size makes its violation of propriety and perhaps of law all the more serious. It would be interesting to make a thorough study of the recipients of funds for research and the specific projects for which Ford Foundation funds were expended. There seems not the slightest doubt that it would disclose a relatively limited circle of institutions, their academicians, and their graduate students. Familiar names appear and reappear. Samuel Stuffer of Harvard receives a grant with no strings attached. So does Marie Jahoda of New York University, former wife of Professor Paul Lazarsfeld. With Mr. Speer on the awarding committee, we find two of his Rand Corporation staff members, Messrs. Goldhamer and Lates, similarly benefited. And so it goes. In the field of research and education, a foundation does not seem to me to have any right to discriminate and to favor certain groups and individuals. Its funds are in use through the grace of all the people. To exclude individuals or institutions because of their philosophies or religious persuasions seems indefensible. One form of discrimination is most difficult to understand. There are 30 million Catholics in this country who maintain scores of universities and colleges. Their institutions do not figure among the favored of the Foundation complex, nor are academicians connected with them likely to receive research grants from the complex. Perhaps there is a good reason for this discrimination. If so, I cannot guess what it might be. True, Catholic institutions were included among the institutional donees to which the Ford Foundation recently donated a huge aggregate of money, a step which deserved the most enthusiastic approval of the general public. But when it comes to special individual grants, to find a Catholic institution as a donee is a rarity indeed. The massive Ford grants to institutions, hospitals, colleges, and medical schools was a very hopeful sign that there might at least be dissension within the Ford Foundation, a conflict between the old school of thought and the new, which favors a non-political and constructive use of its funds. The earlier history of the Foundation, especially in the era of Messrs. Paul Hoffman and Robert M. Hutchins, was to say the least controversial. The first appointments to the Foundation staff after the 1949 platform was adopted, were influenced by these two proponents of radicalism in public affairs. It may take years before this influence, inherited by the new management, can be overcome. It can hardly be overcome unless the Ford Foundation decides to avoid joint ventures with other foundations, to eliminate trustees, executives, and advisors now or recently connected with other foundations or distributing organizations. All this in the interests of trying to effect an unhampered and free contest of ideas. That is the end of the section, the recent past, and I think we're going to wrap up today's live stream there. The next section we've got coming up on next week's live stream is going to be the earlier history of the Ford Foundation, and then we've got the Ford Behavioral Sciences Fund coming up after that. So, excellent stuff. Excuse me, I had to sneeze there. I managed to mute myself right before I held the sneeze in so that I wouldn't blow out your ear holes. But another excellent reading from a fantastic book, which I think is proving to be one of the best ones we've ever read on the channel. So as I mentioned, check out the playlist. You can go and see the full reading of The Story of the Rockefeller Foundation by Raymond B. Fosdick. That ties along very nicely with the contents of this book. I also mentioned in today's live stream, Rockefeller Controlling the Game by Jacob Nordengard. That focuses mainly on the environmentalism movement, but looks at Rockefeller philanthropy and how they put lots of money into saving the environment. And then also you've got to learn more about progressivism. You got The House of Truth by Brad Snyder. And if you've got time to read that, good for you. It's a massive book. But yeah, another good section on the record, another good reading, and we'll review the comments quickly. Looks like we got Lisa popped in. Who's going to catch up on the replay later. Good to have you here. Hope you enjoy it. Justin says, it seems you've got a good system going. Yeah, thank you. I have improved it over time, adding bits to it here and there, but now I think the system and the setup is quite sustainable. I don't think there's any big major changes or tweaks that need to happen. Pretty happy with it as it is at the moment. But you know, you get into these things and you start to fiddle and play with things and make changes here and there. But I don't think it needs to be any different or flashier than it is right now. I think this is good. So thank you. I'm glad that you appreciate the system, and look forward. I can talk you through it anytime. But we're in touch now, so I'm happy to help you and advise you and give you some pointers on how to get up and running with your channel. Justin says, Jedi is awesome. Also, Justin says, I told myself I had to get Alan's book because I owe Alan first support because I went through hours of cutting through the Matrix with him. Jay's books are, I've got two, the first two down here. They're pretty entertaining. If you're into your film, they're a new way to look at film and propaganda and programming coming out of Hollywood. David says, just downloaded Cutting Through 1, 2, and 3 from WeLib. Cool. I hope you enjoy reading them. And if you do enjoy reading them, please consider sending some token of your appreciation to cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Or even better, buy a physical copy. If you do get value from those books, get yourself a physical copy just to support Melissa, who's maintaining Alan's website and who's re-uploading his reduxes every Sunday and adding her own work by way of the Real History podcast, which comes out every Thursday. And I collaborate with Melissa regularly. We've got a few books in the pipeline that we're going to be reading and talking about later this year. So if you can, yes, please do consider supporting Cutting Through the Matrix with some fake, funny fiat money. David also says, it was John Dee who first termed the word interdependence, a maritime club run by Queen Elizabeth I and her navy, where many island nations joined the cult and inadvertently became dependent on their influence. Yes, I've heard that before, that it was John Dee that came up with this term, interdependence. John Dee, Francis Bacon, and this whole time, this Elizabethan England is quite an important time period that I need to learn more about, because it seems like there was a lot of interesting stuff going on there. But thanks for reminding us of that. John Dee, of course, was the original 007, which I heard Jay Dyer say to Tucker Carlson, that 007 is 2 balls and a cane, right? 2 zeros, 2 balls, and the 7 looks like a cane, like a walking stick. So 2 balls and a cane, that's Tubal Cain, which is a name of significance, esoteric and occult significance. Plutonium Podcast, what is going on, man? Thanks for dropping in, saying hello. Hope you're doing well. Frank says, thanks, Nick. Another great one. And David says, best video that Alan Watt made on YouTube is to be an individual. Alan Watts, to be an individual. Yes, this is why we're seeing, in this reading and in the definition of words such as association, it's all about collectivism. It's all about tipping the scale towards the group, the society, the global village, as it's known. I think I have a book with that title, actually, The Global Village. My bad. It's actually the global neighborhood, our global neighborhood. There you go. But yeah, that's what it's all about. And the individual is not important anymore. And Alan emphasized very often, and a main core part of what he taught us was that the individual is the only person who can do anything meaningful in the face of these ancient agendas. And this is why quite often people say, well, what are the solutions? And people might ask me, what are the solutions? What can we do? And it's like, you've got to decide for yourself what you can do. I don't know you. I don't know your situation. I don't know your resources, skills. I don't know the time restraints. I can't stand here and say, de-Google your phone and use cash and sign up to this group and write letters to your MPs and all that. You've got to figure out for yourself what you can do, and then make those changes in your own life. And that's the hard bit. You got to look at the man in the mirror and make that change, as Michael Jackson said. So on that note, I'm going to sign off. Thank you all for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed today's reading. We'll be back next week, continuing this chapter on the Ford Foundation. And allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. If you want to support in any way, you can get in touch by sending me an email at nick@hayesreviews.com. I would love to hear from you. So have a good one, everybody. Take good care of yourself and each other. Find something uplifting and creative and expressive that you can do. And I really hope you have a good week and you stay cool if it's too hot where you are, and you stay warm if it's too cold where you are. And go easy on yourself. Be kind to yourself. Give yourself patience and love and encouragement. Don't let that voice in your skull that's been put there by the television and the schooling and the authority figures in your life, don't let it grind you down, right? Speak kind words of love and encouragement to yourself. Give yourself time and space to process difficult emotions. Allow yourself to sit with fear and sadness and anxiety and anger and feel it, because we are living through agendas which cause those emotions to come up, rightfully so. I don't think it's natural or normal or reasonable to be numb to these kinds of situations that we're living through. I don't think being calm and collected and cool is a realistic human reaction. I think anger, fear, sadness, all these things are legitimate ways to react to what we are aware of and what we're living through. So allow yourself to feel those things, sit with them, process those emotions, but don't let it push you towards just self-destructive behaviors such as, drug abuse and wasting time on futile activities that never go anywhere and actually expose you to more propaganda, such as computer games or Netflix binges or all that kind of stuff. So it's like, allow yourself to feel these emotional, appropriate responses, but process them in a healthy way and funnel that and direct it into something productive and creative and positive for you in your life. That's where the solutions are going to come up for you. You got to figure out what works for you, right? So, be an individual. That's the bottom line. All right, I'm going to sign off. Take care, everybody. Have a good one, and see you next week. God bless.